It was just me and my mom. She was my hero, a dedicated nurse who did everything to take care of me. But when I was only 6 years old, my life turned upside down. She passed away suddenly, and in an instant, I was completely alone. The pain of loss was devastating, and the worst part was realizing that no one in the family wanted to take me in. I felt abandoned by everyone, not knowing what my future would hold. Want to hear more about this story? Click like and subscribe to the channel. After his mother's death, David found himself rejected by his biological father, who refused to take any responsibility. "He didn't want me, Aunt Jessica," David remembered, eyes filled with hurt. David's relatives gathered at his grandmother's house. "We can't take care of him. We have our own problems," said an uncle, crossing his arms. "So, what are we going to do? An orphanage?" asked an aunt, visibly uncomfortable. David, hiding behind the door, listened in silence, feeling abandoned by those who should have been his family. That's when his Aunt Jessica, a former dancer with a heart of gold, stepped in. Against all odds and prejudices, she decided to raise David, facing financial hardships and family criticism, to provide a home filled with love and hope. David looked at his mother's grave, his eyes brimming with tears. "Why did she have to go, Aunt Jessica?" he asked, his voice trembling. Jessica, beside him, squeezed his small hand, trying to offer some comfort. "She was an amazing mother, David. She loved you so much," Jessica replied softly, hiding her own pain. "I miss her so much," David whispered, his face contorted in sadness. David's biological father, Marcos, stood a few yards away, watching from a distance. "He doesn't want to take me with him, does he?" David asked, his gaze fixed on Marcos. Jessica sighed, knowing she couldn't lie. "Unfortunately, no, David. He has other priorities." David nodded, tears streaming down silently. "So, it's just the two of us now?" he asked, trying to sound strong. "Yes, my dear, it's just the two of us," Jessica answered, pulling him into a tight hug. Back at the house, David looked at the pictures of his mom scattered around the living room. "She was so beautiful, Aunt Jessica. Do you think she's happy now?" Jessica smiled sadly. "I'm sure she is, David. She always wanted the best for you." David nodded, still struggling to understand the loss. "I promise I'll make you proud, Mom," he said, determination in his voice. Jessica, despite facing her own challenges, knew she had to be strong for David. "We'll get through this together, David. I'll always be here for you," she said, trying to hide her own insecurities. David looked at her, his eyes full of trust. "I trust you, Aunt Jessica. I know we can do this." "David, today we have to be frugal with dinner. I'm going to make soup with what we have in the fridge, okay?" Jessica said as she searched for ingredients. David nodded, trying not to show his concern. "I don't mind, Aunt Jessica, as long as we're together." Jessica smiled, admiring the boy's resilience. "You're amazing, you know that?" she said, ruffling his hair. "And we'll get through this, I promise." At school, David faced curious looks and cruel comments. "Your aunt isn't really your mom. Why does she take care of you?" a classmate asked. David took a deep breath and replied firmly, "Because she loves me, and that's all that matters." Hearing about the incident, Jessica felt a mix of anger and sadness. "Don't let them get to you, David. They don't know our story." David hugged her, feeling protected by her love. Jessica's relatives weren't making things easy. "Do you really think you can raise a child alone, with your past?" a cousin asked during a family dinner. Jessica, standing firm, replied, "I can and I will. Love isn't about the past, it's about the present and the future we build." David, listening to the conversation in hiding, felt a mix of pride and pain, realizing the challenges Jessica faced because of him. At night, as she put David to bed, Jessica whispered, "I would do it all again, David. Every sacrifice is worth it for you." He smiled, feeling loved and safe, I know, Aunt Jessica, and I'd do everything for you too. Together, they faced a world full of difficulties but found strength in each other. The love they shared became a shield against prejudice and hardship, solidifying the bond they built day by day. The next day, in the schoolyard, David kicked an improvised ball with Amelie. "You're really good, David. Have you ever thought about joining the school team?" Amelie asked, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. David gave a shy smile. "I'd love to, but I'm not sure if Aunt Jessica will agree." Amelie, always optimistic, replied, "You'll never know if you don't ask, and I'm sure she'll understand." Back home, David was eager to talk to Jessica, but found her exhausted after a long day at work. "Aunt Jessica, can I talk to you?" he asked, hesitant. Jessica smiled despite her fatigue. "Of course, David. What's up?" He took a deep breath, but the words got stuck in his throat. "Oh, nothing much. I just wanted to say that I love you." Jessica hugged him, sensing the unspoken anxiety. "I love you too, David. You know you can tell me anything, right?" The next day, Amelie and David continued playing in the yard. "You should talk to her today, David. You're not a burden, and she needs to know what makes you happy." David nodded, feeling courage grow within him. "You're right, Amelie. I'll try again tonight." Amelie smiled, patting him on the back. "That's the spirit, and when you're on the team, I'll be your biggest fan." That night, while having dinner, David finally found the words. "Aunt Jessica, I wanted to talk to you about something that's really important to me." Jessica, giving him her full attention, paused what she was doing. "Of course, David. What is it?" He swallowed hard and said, "I want to play soccer at school. It makes me happy, and I really want to try." Jessica looked at him tenderly. "David, you will never be a burden to me. If it makes you happy, we'll make it happen." The relief and joy on David's face were evident, and he knew he had the unconditional support of Jessica and Amelie. David, now 17, was determined. "Aunt Jessica, I want to be a lawyer. I want to fight for justice, just like you always taught me." Jessica smiled, proud. "I knew you'd find your path, David. You're going to be an excellent lawyer." He felt her support as a cornerstone in his life. "And it's all thanks to you, Aunt Jessica. Thank you for always believing in me." In the middle of his law classes, David received news that shook his convictions. His biological father, Marcos, was being sued for medical negligence. "David, are you okay?" Amelie asked, noticing the tension in her friend. "I don't know what to do, Amelie. He abandoned me, but now he needs help." Amelie thought for a moment. "You need to follow your heart, David. What do your principles tell you?" David spent sleepless nights, torn between family duty and professional ethics. "Aunt Jessica, I'm lost. How can I help someone who abandoned me?" Jessica, with a calm look, replied, "David, being a lawyer means fighting for truth and justice. It doesn't matter who's on the other side. Follow your principles, and the truth will come out." Her words made him think, giving him the clarity he needed. In court, David faced Marcos for the first time in years. "I'm David, and I'm here to represent the victim of medical negligence." Marcos looked surprised, recognizing the son he had abandoned. "David, I didn't know—" David interrupted him, firm. "That doesn't matter now. What matters is justice." The tension was palpable, but David felt empowered by his decision to follow his values, regardless of the past. In court, David was determined. "Mr. Marcos, how can you justify the negligence that led to the patient's death?" Marcos's silence was deafening, and the weight of David's words hung in the air. Amelie watched from the gallery, silently cheering for her friend. "You may be my biological father, but today I fight for the truth, not for blood ties," David continued, his voice firm and unwavering. During the trial, Jessica watched with pride and concern. He's doing well, but this is so hard for him, she whispered to Amelie. Amelie agreed, her eyes fixed on David. He's strong, Jessica, and he has you to thank for that. On the defendant's stand, Marcos looked small and defeated. David, I'm sorry, he tried, but David remained firm. Apologies don't fix broken lives, Dad, only justice can. With every argument presented, David felt he was on the right path and clear in his principles. This is the evidence that Marcos failed to fulfill his duty, he stated, holding up the documents proving the negligence. The judge looked at David, impressed with his passion and dedication. Final judgment in favor of the plaintiff, he declared, banging the gavel. The room erupted in murmurs, and David felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. After the trial, David and Jessica met outside the courthouse. You did it, David. I'm so proud of you, Jessica said, her eyes filled with tears. David hugged her, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Thank you for everything, Aunt Jessica. I couldn't have done it without you. He looked to the horizon, knowing he had found not only justice for the victim, but also closure for his own troubled past. To celebrate David's victory, Jessica prepared a dinner for him. Amelie was in the living room, playing with David, trying to lighten the post-trial tension. You know you make a really funny face when you're focused, she said, laughing. David rolled his eyes, but couldn't help but laugh too. Oh, yeah? And you look like a fish out of water when you're scared, he retorted, making Amelie laugh even louder. Jessica, watching from afar, felt her heart warm as she saw David laughing again. During dinner, Jessica shared a story from her time as a dancer, and then the skirt ripped right in the middle of the performance. Everyone at the table laughed, including David, who looked at Jessica with admiration. You always know how to brighten the day, Aunt Jessica. Jessica smiled. Laughter is the best medicine, my dear, and we need moments like this to balance life. Amelie, with a sparkle in her eyes, added, I totally agree. David and Amelie's study sessions were filled with jokes and laughter. Have you heard the latest lawyer joke? Amelie asked, trying to keep a serious tone. David raised an eyebrow. Here we go again. Amelie grinned mischievously. Why don't lawyers ever get lost? Because they always know their way around a case. David burst into laughter. You and your bad jokes, Amelie, but I guess that's why I like you so much. During quiet moments, Jessica and David reflected on the past and the future. Do you remember when I was little and scared of the dark? David asked. Jessica chuckled softly. Yes, and you insisted on sleeping with the light on. David smiled. You were always there for me, Aunt Jessica, and now I want to always be there for you too. Jessica hugged him, feeling the love and gratitude that bound them even stronger. At the cemetery, David and Jessica walked side by side, carrying flowers. It feels like we lost her just yesterday, David said, looking at his mother's grave. Jessica nodded. She would be so proud of you, David, of everything you've achieved. David placed the flowers on the grave, his hand trembling slightly. I just wish she were here to see all this, he whispered. Jessica, trying to hold back tears, embraced David. She is here, David. She always has been. Every step you've taken, she's been by your side. David took a deep breath, feeling his mother's presence in his heart. I know, Aunt Jessica, and everything I do is to honor her, to show that her sacrifice wasn't in vain. Jessica smiled, hugging him tighter. You've already done that, David, and you will keep doing it. As they walked away from the grave, the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the cemetery. So, what's next? Jessica asked, looking at the horizon. David, with a sparkle in his eyes, replied, Keep fighting for justice, keep honoring my mother's memory, and make sure other kids don't go through what I did. Jessica nodded. On their way back home, David and Jessica walked side by side. You know, Aunt Jessica, I think life has taught us to be strong, David said, looking at her. Jessica smiled, her heart full of pride. And resilient, David. Together, we can overcome anything. And so, with love and resilience as their guide, they moved forward, ready to write new chapters in their story. Have you ever felt like you were alone against the world? How did you overcome it? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep following our inspiring stories.